ICDL's new DIR Parent Network. Support, learn, and thrive together. More information at icdl.com/parents or affectautism.com/events. You're listening to Affect Autism, where affect is the #1 tool we use in supporting child development through playful interaction.
Listeners! My returning guest this episode is Dr. Colette Ryan, an infant mental health specialist who is a DIR expert and training leader, and who is part of a group starting up a new Floortime school in Tokyo, Japan. She is the Floortime Supervisor there. Today we are covering a topic near and dear to Colette's heart, parent self-efficacy, the topic of her recent PhD dissertation, which she recently presented on at the ICDL 2024 DIR Floortime Conference. Welcome back, Colette.
Thank you.
So right now, I'm in the Eastern time zone and Colette is in Tokyo. We've made the time work. It's morning for me. It's evening for her.
Yes.
Let's talk about that for a second. We see parents from all over the world when you're teaching DIR Floortime classes at ICDL, in my parent support groups that I facilitate for ICDL. We have different time zones a lot. What is it like switching time zones?
It's very interesting. I know how to count ahead 13 hours very quickly because of the Eastern time zone is 13 hours behind me. It's interesting always to think that I'm up late at night, and the people that I'm seeing are usually up early in the morning. Because it's or the opposite, depending on what time I'm seeing them. So it's interesting, but Tokyo is fabulous. It's worth the effort.
I have never been, but maybe one day. And if I do come, I'll make sure to visit the Floortime School.
Yes, the Neurodiversity School in Tokyo is the name of it.
Wonderful, wonderful. So how much are you interacting with parents there?
Every day.
You're putting your research into practice every day, which must feel
Yes.
very rewarding.
It is. It is. Parents drop off in the morning and pick up in the afternoon, obviously. But then I also do one-on-one sessions with families on the weekends. And about every 2 to 3 weeks, I do an online class for parents for an hour. I just did one last night, actually, on the first 3 developmental capacities. So we're supporting parents in learning the model and supporting their ability to feel successful with their own child.
And I imagine that the developmental individual differences relationship-based model, DIR Floortime, is new to most of these families, if not all of them.
Most of them. I've been on this journey in Tokyo for about 2.5 years now, and had met several of the families beforehand and had worked with them and with their children, but the rest have all been brand new. And we've been open for about 7 weeks now, and we're already hearing parents say, "My child is so much different. They're talking more. They're more regulated. They can't wait to go to school every day." Where for many of the families, education just hadn't worked for their child because it was too difficult for them. The full title of the dissertation is the use of DIR Floortime to support parental self-efficacy in Japanese mothers. So it's pretty specific.
What made you choose the topic of parent self-efficacy for your PhD dissertation?
At Fielding University. Parents are my favorite. I love working with parents. I love getting a kiddo really cooking, as Dr. Greenspan always told us, and then passing that child off to mom and dad or caregivers so they can get the ooey gooey part. They can get the really successful gleam in the eye, ready to play moment. So parents have always been a passion for me anyway. When we started the DIR home program, working with parents and developing modules for learning for them, we took their ideas about what they needed to learn about for their own child. We took those ideas to develop the home program. And part of the success of the home program was that we were providing parents with the knowledge they needed to be successful with their child.
Absolutely. And in parent support group, I hear nothing but glowing experiences from parents who had that opportunity starting in COVID when everything shut down and they were
Right.
able to get that floor time coaching. So it's just so much needed and wanted by parents for sure. Because let's define what is parent self-efficacy.
Parental self-efficacy is the ability for a parent or a caregiver to feel they are successful and they are capable in helping their child to grow and develop. With predictably developing individuals, most parents feel pretty successful. They can read their child's probably traditional cues. They understand what the different cries mean or what the different gestures are. But when you have a neurodiverse child, that ability might get a little bit harder. And when a family or a caregiver, when parents or caregivers aren't successful with their child, it's hard to want to do it again. It's hard to want to play that game with your child again if it hasn't worked. If your child just can't play peekaboo, you're going to stop playing peekaboo. If they're not able to put their arms up to be picked up, you're not even going to try anymore. What we get to do as floor timers to support parents and maybe seeing that their child's not lifting their arms up because motor planning is really hard. But if you get down on their level, maybe they can reach their hands straight out instead of up. And that might work. Maybe peekaboo is hard because they're uncertain as to where you go when you're behind that scarf or that blanket. So maybe we just use our fingers instead. And now we can be successful. When a parent is successful, they want to do it again and again and again.
A few podcasts ago, a speech language pathologist, Brooks Barrick, talked about that with her twins, how her daughter would reach up, but the son needed to keep his hands on the ground to stabilize himself. And luckily, she could see that he still wanted to be picked up too, even though he couldn't give that cue. So
Yes.
I imagine that's a big part of what you do is, well, I know that because we did a podcast on recognizing and documenting cue sending, cue signals.
Yes.
Talking about that, yep.
Yes. And when a parent can read a child's cue, and it makes all the difference in the world. And just had a conversation with a dad today in the classroom, as in our session last night that I did with parents. We talked a lot about cue reading and cue sending. And he told me that after thinking about it for a while, he knew exactly what I was talking about when his son was sending cues after a 6-hour plane ride, and they had one more hour to go, and he just started laughing hysterically. Just this little boy just could not stop laughing and yelling and singing at the top of his voice. And mom and dad reflected to me today that that wasn't him being silly and having fun. It was a cue to tell them, I'm kind of all done here. You need to help me out a little bit.
Yes, I never ever dared to venture on an airplane with my son when he was little. I think we waited till he was at least 7 or 8. Yeah, I mean, it is very powerful when you finally recognize how to communicate with your child in non-speaking ways and start to notice different cues. And I think different parents are better or worse at doing that, and some need more support in having this kind of thing pointed out to them. That attunement piece of attuning to your child varies so much, I think, from person to person.
It does, and I think that's one of the gifts that Dr. Greenspan gave us, was understanding attunement, understanding how to get a good fit and be that just right challenge. What do I do so I'm just right for my child? And as floor timers, we get to support parents in finding out what's that just right way to be with my child.
I know that I can't remember where I don't know if it was in Engaging Autism that Dr. Greenspan wrote it, or where else I saw it, but I've seen it many times, that he never found a baby that he couldn't engage. Whether, a baby that maybe seemed to be in their own world, so to speak, as people would say, maybe he just adjusted the tone of his voice up higher or down lower, or, spoke more slowly or whatever, did funny movements or slowed down and did less movements, whatever it was, like finding that match.
Yes. And now let's imagine that parent who is so stressed because they have not yet been successful with their child, and how hard it would be for them to try all of those different ways of trying to interact with their child and not be successful. After a while, self-preservation tells you to stop, and then parents become dysregulated.
I was dysregulated a lot with my little, I called him my little protester.
Absolutely. And that was what the results of my study for my dissertation found, was that if we wanted to support parental self-efficacy, we have to floor time parents. We have to support safety and regulation in parents. We have to be able to engage with parents and support their ability to use intentional communication. We have to be able to support them in problem solving, in getting ideas. Because if you don't have those, you're not going to be able to do it with your child. Imagine trying to support a child through symbolic play when you're not even regulated yourself. It doesn't become fun. It's too hard then.
Yeah, and if anyone hasn't seen the We Chose Play documentary, episode 6 of season 1 is Colette coaching me through a video where, she's pointing out different things, helping me think about things, helping me really self-reflect on my own regulation. What was I thinking about at the time? And, we did a retrospective coaching session because the video was 7 years old, but I really did remember everything that was going through my head back in those days, and just being so overwhelmed with how much my child protested and cried, but he could always be soothed. And thank goodness I figured out that all I had to do was like move him side to side to side to side. That vestibular input, he just craved it constantly, which is why it was so hard for him to go to sleep and just be still.
Absolutely. And when we think about the effort that you put in to finding that just right thing that your child needed, and think about the thousands and thousands and thousands of floor time families out there, and providing them with that ability to figure out what's that just right way of being with my child, which can be totally exhausting. So what we need to be able to do as a society and a floor time community is to really hold our parents. We're going to go on this journey with our parents. There's a infant mental health individual from way back, John Bowlby, and he says that if a community really values their children, they need to cherish their parents. We need to be able to support parents on their journey, not just supporting children on their journey. And that needs to be something we as a floor time community really put a lot of effort in, is to cherish these parents.
Yeah, it is so important, and Greenspan talked about floor time as a family approach, and that you
Mhm,
really are treating the entire family when you're working with the family, and helping people with their, like you mentioned, parent self-regulation is huge.
mhm,
And if they can't be regulated, how can you help work and co-regulate with your child?
mhm. The person who gave us parental self-efficacy was Albert Bandura. And so in my dissertation, I talked a lot about the child, the family, the community. So the child, I got my information on the child from Greenspan, talking about development, telling us about individual differences, reminding us about relationships. And then Bandura gave me family. He was able to give me that chunk about understanding how important supporting family is. And then Yuri Brofenbrenner, he gave us the idea of the community that supports. So we have this symbol that I have is the child, the community, the family, the community, which leads us to remember that we need to hold on to these parents and families. We know we need to support parents. How are we going to do it? Well, we're going to talk to them about finding or following the child's lead. We're going to talk to them about attunement, so the different floor time strategies.
And certainly that community piece, I think, is, even though, yes, of course, the family piece we just talked about, like when you have a screaming child, or a child who's, self-injurious, or, doing whatever things that some of the kids do, of course, stress is super high in the home.
Mhm.
But what I hear a lot of parents saying is that community is missing.
Mhm.
They don't have any DIR practitioners in their area or whatever, and this is the value of the parent support meetings, where parents
Mhm.
get together and they can connect, and I found that parents really listen to each other. They definitely
Mhm.
want to interact with the people who support them with, like, the floor time coach or whatever, but then they also really respond so well to that aspect of community. And so I think all three pieces are such an important thing to include, having all three that you talked about. Yeah.
Absolutely. And when we think about community, we in Brofferbretter's theory, we have the tiny circle in the middle, which is the child, their immediate family, and then you've got the extended family, you have the school, and then out of that you might have religion, culture, politics, all of these circles that keep going out. And as you said earlier, we have floor time families from all over the world, which means we have lots of different cultures that we as floor timers need to work within. And the culture I work mostly within, obviously, is the Japanese culture. And they have a concept here in Japan called Meiwaku. And Meiwaku is um, it's the desire not to cause anybody else discomfort. And so, as a community, most individuals within the Japanese culture, they try to make sure that they don't cause anybody else any bother. Well, as you said, sometimes our children are yelling, screaming, having meltdowns, and that would cause other people bother. So the Japanese culture may have difficulty understanding their part in that community. And that's the piece that I get to do even more and more here while I'm in Japan. But this is happening in all cultures. All cultures have their own social mores, the things that help you to fit in. And we as floor timers need to be able to support individuals in different cultures to support how their community would be able to support their family.
It is interesting because now we're speaking of a different layer altogether, which is your training as a practitioner. So I bet you've learned so much just in working with different families. I remember how you learned that in the Orthodox Jewish culture, the women couldn't sing if there was a man in the
Mhm,
room. Was that
mhm.
how it was?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
how that really had to change how you interacted with a family. And so
Hmm.
different cultural pieces that come up is such a learning experience for you.
It is. And before the war in the Ukraine, I had been, I spent a week in Kiev and worked with families and different practitioners and understood some beautiful things about that culture. But then once the war happened, now I'm supporting families, right after the war. Then I was supporting families who were going through this huge trauma event. And they were leaving their country, they were fleeing in the middle of the night. And so now I had to do something different for individuals in that culture. We know of some cultures that don't have a word for affect. And we need to support families, parents, and caregivers to understand what affect is in some of those cultures. So culture really comes into to the whole idea of parental self-efficacy. What does it feel like for a parent in this culture to feel successful?
And I'll put in the blog post for today's podcast the episode I did with Nagwa Kader about Middle
Mhm,
Eastern culture, and with Galina Itzkovich
mhm,
about the trauma in her work with
mhm.
Ukrainians during the war as well. And
Yeah,
yeah, I mean, it really, the more you dive into parent self-efficacy, the more that you see all of these layers.
yes.
So I guess,
Mhm,
yeah, I mean, people that are listening to this podcast are pretty familiar with the principles of floor time, but
mhm.
really you're doing this when you're working with a parent and trying to, I guess, increase their parental self-efficacy, you're
Mhm.
really floor timing the parents. So
Yes.
meeting the parents where they're at, taking into
Mhm,
account the parent and family individual
mhm.
differences, how sensory systems
Absolutely.
clash, perhaps,
Mhm.
all of that stuff, and building that relationship with the family.
Yes, absolutely. And it's hard. I'm just going to put it out there. It's
Especially, I
hard.
imagine virtually too, because a lot of the work you did was virtual, and now
Mhm.
you're working in person and probably virtually too. But it's
Yes.
there's a difference.
There's a different feel to it when you're in the room with the family and you're in the middle of a session with the family and you see the anxiety that might be building in mom or dad or caregiver because their child is doing something that maybe they don't want somebody else to see. Maybe their child is stimming or running around the house, and now mom or dad or caregiver are now becoming overwhelmed themselves. And so those are times when we might keep our little one in sight, but that might be a time where I just sit with mom and dad or caregiver and talk about something other than what's happening to help them to organize. We use this method also when we do intensives at the DIR Institute in Livingston, New Jersey. In those moments when parents might become dysregulated, one of the training leaders doing the intensive will keep child safe, but the other one will sit with mom or dad or caregiver and maybe we're talking about this great toy that we have in front of us. Or maybe we ask about the sleep schedule from the night before and we get to talk about something other than what their child is doing in that moment so that we can work to regulate again. Once parents are regulated, then it's easier to regulate the child. You probably know the graphic of the boat on the wavy seas and then the calm boat. And where the calm boat? The adult brings the calm to the child's wavy seas. And That's a graphic from Stuart Shanker. We want to make sure that the parent is on those calm seas before they attempt to regulate their child on those rough seas.
Yeah, and I imagine that it's very different as well when you get to work virtually with just the parents and the child is either in school or with the other parent while you're talking. So you get to really see that more reflective side of the parent who can probably have insights that they don't even have a chance to get to when they're overwhelmed in the moment with their child.
Absolutely. And because floor timers have worked and worked and worked on our craft to know how to support families, I think families allow themselves to be vulnerable with us. And in those moments of vulnerability, we can support parents in reflecting on what we're talking about, but then providing the strategies that families need. Maybe they've never heard of pacing before. Maybe they need someone to describe to them what the sensory system is like when it's processing information. And sometimes if we just slow down, that might help. Maybe the strategy of following the child's lead has been misunderstood by the parent. And so we get to have that conversation about following the child's lead. And when I presented at the conference, we talked a lot about the different strategies that we can use in order to support parental self-efficacy.
Now, we can get into some of those, but just off the top, like what do you find, and I guess it's different with every family, but what do you find a trend that something overall that almost every family has faced, and my guess is it's going to be slowing down?
It's the 4 L's: less language, longer latency. So using less words. When we think about how we converse with another adult, we have lots of words in our sentence because our predictably developing partner can handle all of those words. And maybe we can use 2 or 3 sentences. Whoa, wow. I can give you a whole bunch of information and you can process it, make sense of it, and then know what to send the message back to me is. But for many of the individuals that we work with, we may need to use 1 or 2 words, maybe a gesture and a word. So by using less language, we conserve that brain energy to be spent on the play and the interaction and not trying to process the language that's being used. And when we use longer latency, we slow down. We slow down our language, our movement, our body language, gestures, so that a child can keep up with us. If I'm moving really fast across a room and I'm waving to a kiddo and saying, "Hi, how are you?" as I'm going past them, they might see where I started and where I ended, but they may not see the path that I took because it happened too fast and they couldn't process it all. So for families, when they hand children things, or when they're trying, maybe it's mealtime and we want things to happen quickly, fast isn't always best. If we can ask families to slow that pacing down, sometimes kiddos can keep up with us better. So I think for me, that's one of the top strategies that I give to families is the 4 L's: less language, longer latency.
And I'm thinking about an example I gave in one of the episodes of We Chose Play. I think it was episode 5 in season 1, where an early consultation we had with Dr. Gil Tippy. And he was so kind in the way he worded it, but we were showing a video of dad doing typical dad and son play. And Dr. Tippy said, Dad is very athletic. And he was saying, like, slow down, because, Dad was having fun, with a ball and throwing it here and throwing it there, but it was so fast. My son was kind of like, doesn't know
Yes.
how to keep up, and that might get him a little dysregulated and anxious because he wants so badly to play the game with Dad and to get the ball, but Dad was moving so fast. And we find this, also, talking, like you said, a lot of stereotypically women use a lot of words compared to men. And so there's different ways of slowing down your body, your words, your actions.
Even your affect.
Yes. And Gil Tippy really, the coaching really helped Dad to use that anticipation where he was like, like holding his mouth open, holding the ball in the air, and our son gets so excited, and just getting that engagement to have longer interactions happen.
Yes. And I bet that in that moment, Dad felt successful in playing ball with his son. And maybe when he was going really fast, your son wasn't able to pick up the ball and throw it back, that felt less successful.
Yeah, it's interesting because we're always focused on the child, but you just brought it right back to the parent. How successful does the parent feel? So really focusing on that as well as the child's capacities as a result of that.
Yes.
Yeah, I love it.
Absolutely. And I keep going back to this, but a parent who is successful will do it again. A parent who is not successful may not have the brain energy to be able to do it again and again. And that's what we get to do as floor timers, is to provide success. There's been so many studies done recently on parent-mediated models, how important parent-mediated models are in intervention. And along with that came a lot of research on parental self-efficacy and what it meant for a parent to provide support for their child, and how it made the parent feel when they were able to play ball with their child, to get their child to eat their lunch, to be able to get their child in the car seat successfully because they knew to slow it down. That's real success for families.
Now you're making me think of transitions, and I'll put a link to a podcast on transitions as well that I've done, but it's really about the speed again, when we're pulling a child out of something they're doing and expecting them to move, and how much of a struggle that is. And the autistic self-advocate Kieran Rose talks about that monotropism, where it's like being sucked out of a black hole and then having to go somewhere else. And so, yeah, if you're just picking up your kid and putting them in the car seat and expecting them to just go along with it,
right,
it might not work so well.
No, and the way I explain it to parents is, imagine if somebody came to your door and you opened the door and they grabbed you by the hand and put you in the back of the car and started driving away. You would be terrified. It's the same thing for many of our children. You can verbally tell them, we have to go to the store in 5 minutes. And if they're not processing that, when 5 minutes are up and you pick them up and put them in the car seat, they still have no idea where they're going. Why am I leaving my toys and getting in the car? I don't know why I'm in this spot. But if we slow that down and we show pictures of where we're going, we may have a transitional device that we can use. Maybe it's a certain picture or a stuffed animal or something, so that the child knows, oh, when I have this in my hand, we're going in the car. And I remember this thing means car. And now the parent can be successful in that transition to the car.
And I'll put a link to our podcast on meaning making.
Meaning making, yay!
Yeah, and you know, one thing that I do with my son, who's now 15, when we have to get up and go in the morning to school, and no, I want to stay home all day. I want to play all day. You know, I'll say, "Oh, wait a second. Which playlist are we going to listen to today?" You know, just slowly starting to get him to think about the things that he likes about our car ride, because we have a big playlist of all his favorite songs, and we have, you know, his Super Mario playlist of songs. We have his train songs, which are mostly Thomas and Friends, but other train songs that we have. Then we have the Mama Music playlist, we called it now. And it's, you know, all of my 80s and fun songs that I like. And the latest one that I got him into, and he asks for it all the time, is Party Train by the Gap Band, which is a super fun song because it starts with a woo woo, you know, and so he says, let's listen to Mama Music. And he loves Super Trooper by ABBA, because I changed the lyrics to Koopa Troopa, turtle with a green shell, yellow like the sun. And so he loves that. So we do all these fun things in the car, and that's you know, one of the techniques that I use for transitioning to the car, because I know that whereas car rides might have been very distressing for him when he was little, now they're fun because we have the different songs. I figured out how to, you know, change to the next song without having to look at my phone or anything through Bluetooth. I could just press a button on the steering wheel so I'm not distracted while I'm driving, you know, all of these different types of things. And you could do so much floor time, so many floor time variations with that. But that transition piece is so tough for sure. And yeah, did you want to say anything else about transitions?
Well, just that you found success, and so you were willing to do it again and again.
He's still going to protest and say that he wants to stay home all day, but he'll still, you know, prefer to be with his Lego and to be with all of his figures from Inside Out 2 that he's super enamored by right now. But yeah, having, you know, kind of setting those firm expectations of, no, I have to work. You're going to school today. Oh, what are we going to listen to on the way? You know, just like sort of shifting that focus. And of course, it's going to be very different with a 15-year-old than, you know, a preschooler. And you're going to have the whole range of different things depending on where the child is developmentally, et cetera, et cetera. I wondered if it might be interesting for listeners for you to walk me through a little piece of an example of how you work with parents, because you made me think of something when you said parents might give up. So the latest, let's say, challenge that I've been having with my regulation is my son, from the second he wakes up to the second he's asleep, he's talking. Even after he's asleep and we say goodnight and I close the door, and I can hear for the next half hour him talking to himself about Super Mario stuff. It's adorable. But the part that's dysregulating for me is he's constantly asking me questions over and over and over and over, and it's the same questions over and over. He knows the answer to them. I think he just wants to keep that interaction going and wants, you know, he loves interacting with me. So he'll say, what color is Luigi again? You know, obviously he knows Luigi's green, or, you know, whatever his clothes are green, but I'm just making that up because I can't think of all the things but, you know, he'll say, whose birthdays are in January? And he'll go through the whole calendar. January, and we'll list all the January birthdays. February, we'll list all the February birthdays. March, oh, you know, Auntie so-and-so is on March whatever, and then cousin so-and-so on March, and his teacher is March whatever. And then April, oh, Grandpa's birthday's in April, and blah, 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 blah. May, June, July, and every day we're talking about birthdays nonstop. So I've started to try. I was like, okay, I'm sick of talking about birthdays. We talk about birthdays all the time. Can we talk about something else? And it might work for a second, but then we're right back to birthdays. And when's your birthday? I'm like, you know when my birthday is. You know, just like on and on, being drilled with questions while I'm trying to get dinner ready, while I'm trying to whatever. And sometimes I'm happy to engage, but sometimes it's just like, can you give me a break for just a second and stop asking me so many questions? So if that is the parent you're working with,
Hmm.
what kind of
Yeah.
things would you suggest?
And the first thing I'm going to tell them is it's not about the birthdays.
Okay.
It's not about the birthdays. It's the fact that you're his favorite person in the entire world, and he wants to keep that interaction going. And
But it is
maybe
exciting, Colette, when we find out someone else's new birthday and we get to add that to the collection.
that's the and are all of these birthdays written down someplace?
He has asked to write them on the new calendar because he has a Mario calendar for this year. Now he wanted an Inside Out 2 calendar, and I got it for Christmas, but then I noticed that it says a 16-month calendar, and I thought it probably starts in September. So I gave it to him as a surprise early, and it just has the 4 little months on one page. But now he's looking through it, and he wants to write everybody's birthday on the calendar. And like some of the birthdays, they're just like random people that we don't even really know, but he knew and I'm like, I don't want to write that on the calendar, but he's so excited.
He wants them on the calendar. Absolutely. Absolutely. They mean something different to him than they do to us. And I think that's the piece that I like to be able to tell parents is it's not about the birthday. It's about you being his very favorite person and wanting this interaction. So maybe we shift from talking about birthdays to talking about person. So if you get to April and he says, whose birthday is in April? You might say, it's Grandpa's birthday. Grandpa's birthday. And you might say something like, but his real name is, and then you can add the real name. And he used to live in where. So expand on the person and not be so stressed about the birthdays over and over again, because you're going to add something new to it. So maybe you'll be talking about Grandpa's real name over and over again. And from there, you can expand to other things. But I want you to hold on to the fact that you're the most important person in the world to him. And he's keeping that conversation going because he never wants to let go of you.
Yes. And, it's so funny because I should know how to do this. I'm the Floortime person who does the podcast all the time. I have my advanced certificate. But this is what parents bring to parent support meeting all the time. I read everything. I listen to your podcast, but I don't really know what to do with my kid. And again, this is the value of a Floortime coach is just brainstorming. What kinds of things can I do? And,
Yes.
I had the and I can't remember if it was Dr. Tippy or somebody else, because we had an intensive in New Jersey in August, and it was, my son absolutely loved it, and I got to see Dr. Tippy for an hour or so, and he said, just say, I don't feel like talking about it. And, he's got to get used to the real life interactions, and why not practice with somebody who's safe? And now you've given me a second idea, and I remember Maud LaRue always saying, don't respond exactly the same way every time. You want to vary it up. So thank you for that idea. I am going to try it, and listeners tune in because in a future podcast, I'll talk about how that went.
And my birthday's in April also.
I know.
You can add it on there.
It's funny because, sometimes like we'll be going through and, he now knows Gretchen's birthday too. So he's added her to the list. Gretchen Kamke was one of the Floortime coaches at our intensive. And, Becky's dad has the same name as my dad, Grandpa.
Perfect.
So that was also something we talked about that he's since brought up again. So he really likes to collect these facts. And I do the same. I mean, I remember, I really like to know when people's birthdays are, how old they are, what kind of family structure they have. Like, I like collecting information about people's biographies. Other people are like, I can't remember birthdays. I can't remember names. But that kind of stuff's important to me too. So I can understand how it's important for my son as well. And that helps too.
Mhm. And there's lots of different companies out there that will make books from your pictures
Oh,
from
we have them.
and I wonder if there could be an April book
Hmm.
with not just Grandpa's birthday, but picture Grandpa's story. Who was Grandpa?
Yep.
What did he do when he was younger? Did he like to climb trees? Did he like to go swimming? So let's make Grandpa more than just his birthday. Let's
I
give
love it
Grandpa's story.
because I documented every minute of my son's life since he was born in Shutterfly photo books. I've now fallen 6 years behind. The last photo book I did was the holidays of 2017, the end of the year, and so I got to start catching up on 2018. When will I have time? I don't know. But another, that was an idea that Jackie Bartell gave me as well for a transition when my husband and I separated, is making a book that he can have pictures and help to understand some of the new routines that were going on. And he loved it. And so I've been meaning to do another one as well. But the birthday thing is a really great idea as well, to have, instead of just the book of January to March of 2000, whatever, and all the stuff he did, instead having books on topics that we can make.
Absolutely. And they can become reading, stories that you read at night, books that you take with you in the car, for pictures, for reading, for conversations.
It's funny, he's very particular, so the storybooks have to stay there, and it's for bedtime. He doesn't want to do that at other times. And then, the stuff that's in the car, we do in the car. And he doesn't want to bring the toys that he plays with in that room into the car. It's funny how he's got his different routines.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it's, I don't know if people can see, maybe I'm not that expressive on the podcast, my face, but honestly, Colette, I lit up and I feel energized to try these things. So thank you so much. So we're demonstrating firsthand on the podcast the effects of parental self-efficacy, because I do feel oh, this is so exciting now. I'm going to make a photo book for my son about Grandpa, and I'm going to make my photo book about, whatever else that he talks about.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And now you're feeling energized and you're probably regulated and you're ready to engage with the world. At this particular time, he's not home, but when you feel that energy, when you feel that success, now you're ready to go and play and interact and open circles because you're filled up.
Yes. And of course, with the caveat that I might be so excited about this new book and he rejects it. Well, now I know that he won't. I know that he won't, because he'll love that. But, that's the part I think where the coach comes in handy too, is really when something doesn't work and I feel deflated, that you can, give me other things to try. Talk about that you don't have to give up. Maybe it was the situation, and in the other situation tomorrow that would work differently.
Absolutely. Brain budgets change all the time.
Well, this has just been so much wonderful information about parent self-efficacy. Is there anything we didn't cover that you wanted to cover before we wrap up this episode?
Thank you, parents, for letting us borrow you and support you. And as a community, Floortime is going to keep supporting parents, because when we can cherish the parents, that shows that we value the child.
Well, Thank you so much, Colette, and everything will be listed at affectautism.com. On our blog post, I'll put links to different podcasts and references that we talked about.
Wonderful. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Until next time, here's to choosing play and experiencing joy every day. Are you looking for a podcast on a specific topic or trying to find one that you listened to before? Check the Start Here menu at affectautism.com, where you can search all podcasts and blog posts by category, topic, profession, or specific guest. You can also type in the keywords into the search box, which is in the magnifying glass icon at the top right of the website. Check it all out at affectautism.com.